to talk about the spotlight, ETFs and Bitcoin ETF that they've been working on right now. I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. Craig, we only have 8 minutes here. This is like a commercial during the Super Bowl, a very good commercial during the Super Bowl.
We just saw really good.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll get right into it. The SEC recently denied your application. Can you give us some updates on where we stand right now?
Sure. So just to level set, Grayscale is the sponsor of Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, ticker symbol GBTC. It's the largest publicly traded Bitcoin fund in the world, represents about 1 million investors across all of the US, has tens of billions of dollars of AUM, trades tens to hundreds of millions of dollars of trading volume. However, today it is not a spot-based Bitcoin ETF, which is what we believe to be the most efficient way to get Bitcoin exposure. And so last October, we filed a form called a 19B4 with the SEC, which is the application to convert GBTC into a spot Bitcoin ETF. We specifically did it on the date that we did because that was the same day that the first Bitcoin futures ETF started trading in the US, which was a really important event because it's just bringing more access and exposure to Bitcoin for US investors. What that process did was kick off a 240-day standard review period where the SEC invites the public in to submit comment letters expressing why they believe or don't believe the SEC should allow spot-based Bitcoin ETFs. During this time, we kicked off a national campaign across the US to really activate our investor base primarily to let them know they could be a part of this process. But through that campaign, we saw letters come in from academics, from trade associations, from policymakers, from market participants, like authorized participants that would support the ETF, all with very strong substantive arguments. We also actually broke a record for most letters submitted to the SEC for rule change. It was about 11,500. And that's just a reflection of how important and significant this particular product is. And so during the course of that process, letters came in. We were really encouraged by that support. But ultimately, we found out a couple weeks ago that we were denied in our application. And as a result, we filed something called a petition for review, which challenges the SEC's denial of our Bitcoin ETF application. And what that challenge really comes down to is something super simple. You have two types of ways to get Bitcoin exposure, through Bitcoin futures or through physical or spot Bitcoin. Both of those methods are deriving their pricing from the same underlying spot Bitcoin markets. And so if you're okay with an ETF that holds Bitcoin futures, you should also be okay with an ETF that holds spot Bitcoin.
So was this lawsuit your only course of action?
So this is something that's played out over many years. Back in 2016 and 2017, you had really the first wave of Bitcoin ETF applicants, both for futures and spot-based ETFs. And at that time, the SEC had concerns around things like fraud or manipulation in the underlying Bitcoin markets. And given that concern, they denied or told to withdraw all types of ETFs, which makes sense, again, because they are priced based on those same underlying markets. We pulled our application and then later last year refiled because of that event around the Bitcoin futures ETF. So this is something that's been going on for a long time. We and other peer firms like Grayscale have engaged with the SEC to help resolve some of these issues. And we got to a point a couple weeks ago where we received a final denial order. And so we were left with a choice. We could either do nothing and continue to operate GBTC as is, but we don't believe it's our fiduciary duty to do that because these investors both want and deserve a more regulated Bitcoin investment vehicle. So we were at a point where we had essentially exhausted all resources except appealing to the judicial branch, and that's where we are now. And really focused on explaining our arguments, which we think are very straightforward and compelling, and looking forward to engaging with the courts on that.
Yeah, it seems healthy for the market to get this sorted out.
Right. I mean, if you look at other parts of the world, Australia, Brazil, Canada, I'm going in alphabetical order, Europe, they all have spot-based Bitcoin ETFs and other cryptocurrency ETFs. And those are markets that have robust securities regulations. So the question is, what is really holding us back here in the US?
So from this point on, what does the timeline look like now?
Yep, so that's a very common question we get around timeline. One important thing to note is because we're challenging a decision from a federal agency, rather than going to the district level, which is the first tier of the federal court system, we bypass that level and go straight to the appellate level. So that saves a good chunk of time. Based on discussions with our counsel, we're hearing at the appellate level anywhere from 9 to 12 months, could be shorter, could be longer. Litigation is inherently uncertain in terms of timing. But right now, we're just laser focused on drafting our brief, which is the written substantive arguments that we'll be presenting to the appellate court. And again, what it really boils down to is something super straightforward and simple. You have futures ETFs, you have spot ETFs. They both derive their pricing based on the underlying spot Bitcoin markets.
Sounds simple.
So if you're okay with one, you should also be okay. I completely agree.
So you're in a lawsuit with the SEC basically right now. So is that going to hamper your relationship right now? I mean, I read a lot of the press. It's not really like there's an argument. This is more of a disagreement.
Yeah, so I have nothing but respect for the individuals at the SEC who for years have been grappling with the important and challenging questions presented by digital assets, of which spot Bitcoin ETFs are but one. We and other firms have been in conversations with them, working through these issues around crypto. How is it used? Where does it trade? How is it priced and custody and things like that? And we're just at an impasse where we have a disagreement on how the regulations that would allow for Bitcoin ETFs to start trading are being interpreted. And so when you have a situation like that, because we have a system of checks and balances, we have the judicial branch that you can appeal to see if they will interpret the rules and regulations the way you believe they should. So it's very much a respectful relationship and not something that has anything to do with any sort of ill will or anything between market participants and regulators.
It definitely seems like a fair challenge for sure. So what happens if they come back and they continue to deny?
Yeah, so right now, super focused on setting up our brief. There's also an opportunity where those that have an interest in the matter can submit something called an amicus brief. And what that is a friend of the court in Latin, and it's for those that have a view that they think would be important for the judges to receive and also work through the issues. So focusing on that, building out our strategy with Don Verrilli, who's the former Solicitor General under Obama, who's the senior legal strategist on this matter, and then also our lawyers at Davis Polk, and we're taking things from there.
And if they come back, when they come back and say that you're approved, what happens then?
So the way it would work is a victory on our side would mean that we can no longer be denied on the basis that we've been denied, as well as all the other spot-based ETFs, and then it goes back to the SEC, and then we go through that process.
I like the victory. It sounds good.
Yeah.